Good evening, dear listeners, and welcome back to Snug as a Bug. I'm Atticus, and tonight we venture into the storied hills of ancient Latium to uncover the saga of Romulus and Remus, the mythical founders of Rome. Our tale tonight traces the origins of the eternal city, beginning with the birth of the twin brothers, left to fate on the banks of the river Tiber. We'll explore their miraculous survival under the care of a she-wolf and culminate with the establishment of a city that would stand the test of time. Let the mythic narratives of history soothe your senses and escort you towards tranquil slumber, as the echoes of antiquity cradle you into the arms of sleep. But before we delve into these legendary tales, let's take a moment to let go of any lingering tension. Close your eyes and settle deeper into your bed, feeling the soft, supportive embrace of your mattress beneath you. Take a slow, deep inhale, filling your lungs with calm, and then a long, slow exhale, releasing any heaviness that remains. Let each breath draw you further into stillness, each exhale carrying you into a place of comfort and ease. Imagine now that you stand on the edge of the Palatine Hill, high above the Tiber River. The air is warm and the golden light of dusk bathes the hills in a gentle glow. Below, the river flows steadily, carrying with it the whispers of ancient stories, tales of gods and mortals intertwined in the web of fate. The soft breeze brushes past you, carrying the scents of the wildflowers that grow along the riverbanks. As you stand there, you feel a sense of calm wash over you, a quiet knowing that you are exactly where you need to be. The ancient energy of this place hums around you, inviting you to sink deeper into relaxation, deeper into peace. Feel yourself becoming lighter, the weight of the day dissolving into the soft evening air. With every breath, you are more at ease, more at one with the world around you. The gentle rustling of leaves, the distant flow of the river, it all invites you to drift further into stillness. Now, you are ready to begin your journey through time, back to the days of Romulus and Remus, when the foundations of the eternal city were laid. Let the ancient myths guide you as you gently drift into a deep and restful sleep. The birth and abandonment of Romulus and Remus. Chapter 1. A Kingdom in Turmoil. The kingdom of Alba Longa sat nestled in the hills of Latium, its white stone walls gleaming in the light of the setting sun. From afar, the city looked like a beacon of prosperity, its lush green fields and abundant olive groves stretching out as far as the eye could see. But behind the facade of peace and wealth, the kingdom was crumbling from within, its royal family torn apart by greed and betrayal. Numitor, the rightful king of Alba Longa, had once ruled the city with wisdom and fairness. Under his reign, the people had flourished, and the city had grown strong. But Numitor's benevolence had been his undoing, for in the shadows his younger brother Amulius had harbored a dark ambition. Amulius had always lived in his brother's shadow, bitter and jealous of the power that Numitor wielded. For years, he had bided his time, waiting for the perfect moment to seize the throne. And then, one fateful night, under the cover of darkness, Amulius struck. With the help of loyal soldiers who had been swayed by promises of power and wealth, Amulius orchestrated a swift and silent coup. Numitor, unaware of the danger, was dragged from his bed in the dead of night, his cries for help muffled by the rough hands of the guards who had once sworn allegiance to him. Within hours, Amulius had taken control of the palace, and by morning he was seated on the throne that had once belonged to his brother. The people of Alba Longa woke to find their city under the rule of a new king. Amulius, in his first act of cruelty, ordered the death of Numitor's sons, ensuring that there would be no heirs left to challenge his claim to the throne. The blood of the royal family ran in the streets, staining the walls of the palace and sending a wave of fear through the city. The people, too terrified to rise against him, were forced to accept Amulius as their new ruler. But Numitor had a daughter, Rhea Silvia, who had been spared from the slaughter. Rhea Silvia was young, beautiful, and, most importantly, childless, a fact that Amulius believed would ensure the end of Numitor's bloodline. To guarantee that she would never bear children, Amulius forced her into the service of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. As a Vestal virgin, Rhea Silvia was bound by a sacred vow of chastity, her life dedicated to keeping the eternal flame of Vesta's temple burning. To break that vow would mean certain death. And so Amulius believed his reign was secure. With Rhea Silvia bound to her vows and her father in exile, he ruled Alba Longa with an iron fist, crushing any whispers of dissent before they had the chance to grow into rebellion. But the gods had not forgotten the bloodline of Aeneas. Chapter 2. The Visit of the God of War. Rhea Silvia had always found peace in the quiet solitude of the temple. The eternal flame that flickered in the heart of the sanctuary was a symbol of stability, a reminder that life, like fire, was fragile, yet enduring. Day after day she tended the flame, her hands steady and sure as she offered prayers to the goddess Vesta. Yet, beneath the calm surface of her duties, Rhea Silvia's heart ached with a deep sorrow. She had lost her family, her freedom, and any hope of a future beyond the walls of the temple. The temple was a place of silence and reflection, but in the stillness, Rhea Silvia could not escape her thoughts. She remembered her father's gentle voice, the way he had ruled with kindness, and how her brothers had played in the palace gardens. Those memories, once filled with joy, now brought only pain. She could still hear their laughter, see their faces, but those were echoes of a past that had been stolen from her. It was on one of those quiet nights, with the stars twinkling high above and the flames casting long shadows on the walls of the temple, that Rhea Silvia's life changed forever. She knelt before the altar, her head bowed in prayer, her hands clasped tightly as she whispered her hopes and fears into the sacred space. The air was still, and the only sound was the soft crackle of the flames as they danced in their stone hearth. And then a presence filled the room. At first it was subtle, barely noticeable, a shift in the air, as though a great power had stirred just beyond the edges of her awareness. Rhea Silvia's heart quickened, her breath catching in her throat as she sensed the change. The temperature in the temple seemed to drop, and the flames flickered, casting strange, twisting shadows on the walls. Rhea Silvia dared not move. Her instincts told her that something, someone, was watching her. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her gaze from the floor, her eyes widening as she saw the figure standing in the shadows. Mars, the god of war, stood before her, his presence overwhelming, radiating a power that seemed to press down on the very air she breathed. His form was imposing, towering over her with the strength of 1,000 battles, yet his gaze was not one of cruelty or anger. There was something else in his eyes, something that spoke of destiny. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rhea Silvia remained kneeling, too stunned to move, while Mars regarded her in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, resonating through the temple like the distant roll of thunder. "Rhea Silvia," he said, his tone commanding but not harsh. "You have been chosen." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Rhea Silvia felt her heart pound in her chest as she tried to comprehend what was happening. Chosen by the god of war? Her mind raced with questions, but before she could speak, Mars stepped forward, his presence filling the space between them. "You are the daughter of kings," Mars continued, his gaze unwavering. "And though your family has been brought low by the hands of men, the gods have not forgotten you. From your bloodline will come the founders of a new empire, a city that will rise above all others, a city that will stand the test of time." Rhea Silvia trembled as the prophecy unfolded before her. She had heard stories of the gods choosing mortals to fulfill great destinies, but never had she imagined that she would be one of them. Her mind struggled to grasp the enormity of what Mars was telling her. A city founded by her children? "The fates have decreed it," Mars said, his voice softening slightly. "You will bear 2 sons, twin brothers, who will shape the destiny of this world. They will be warriors, leaders, and their names will be remembered for all eternity." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt beneath her. Rhea Silvia's thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of the prophecy. She was a Vestal virgin, bound by sacred vows never to bear children. How could she defy those vows? How could she bring such danger upon herself? But as she looked into the eyes of Mars, she saw no room for doubt. The gods had willed it, and their will could not be denied. She would bear the sons of the god of war, and their destiny would shape the future of the world. With a single step, Mars closed the distance between them. His hand, strong and warm, reached out to gently touch her face, and in that moment, a spark of divine energy passed between them. Rhea Silvia felt it deep within her, a warmth that spread through her body, filling her with a sense of purpose and power. She had been chosen by the gods, by fate, and her path was now clear. That night, beneath the watchful gaze of the gods, Romulus and Remus were conceived. Chapter 3. The Birth of the Twins. The day of Rhea Silvia's labor dawned with a quiet stillness that seemed to hang over the city of Alba Longa. The sky was overcast, a blanket of soft gray clouds hiding the sun, casting a muted light over the land. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as though the very earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for something momentous to happen. In a small, secluded chamber within the Temple of Vesta, Rhea Silvia labored alone. The midwives who had once tended to the births of the royal family had been dismissed by Amulius, and no one dared defy his orders to assist her. She was left to bring her children into the world in secret, her only companions the stone walls of the chamber and the soft flickering of the oil lamps that lit the room. The pain was intense, each contraction racking her body like a wave crashing against the shore. But through the agony, Rhea Silvia held on to the knowledge that her suffering was part of something greater. She had been chosen by the gods, and the children she bore were destined for greatness. The thought of them, her sons, Romulus and Remus, gave her strength as she pushed through the pain. The air in the chamber was thick and humid, the scent of incense mingling with the sharp tang of sweat and blood. Rhea Silvia's cries echoed off the walls, her body trembling with the effort of bringing her sons into the world. She could feel them, strong and alive, moving within her, and despite the pain, a fierce love surged through her heart. These were her sons, the future of Rome, the heirs to a divine destiny. Hours passed, each one feeling like an eternity. But finally, after what felt like a lifetime, the first cries of her newborn sons filled the chamber. The sound was sharp and piercing, a cry of life that seemed to cut through the stillness of the world outside. With trembling hands, Rhea Silvia reached for her firstborn, cradling him against her chest. His tiny body was warm and soft, his skin pink and flushed from the effort of his birth. He wailed, his small fists clenched as he demanded to be heard. Rhea Silvia smiled through her tears, pressing a kiss to his forehead as she whispered his name. "Romulus," she breathed, her voice filled with love and awe. A few moments later, her second son entered the world, his cries just as loud and fierce as his brothers. Rhea Silvia held him close, her heart swelling with pride and joy as she whispered his name. "Remus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My sons, my beautiful sons." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Rhea Silvia held her newborn sons in her arms, their small bodies nestled against her, their cries quieting as they found comfort in her warmth. The world outside the chamber faded away, and for a brief, precious moment, it was just the three of them, mother and sons, bound by love and destiny. But even as she held them, a sense of dread crept into her heart. She knew that this peace could not last. Amulius would soon learn of their birth, and when he did, he would stop at nothing to see them killed. The prophecy of the twins had been foretold, and the king's paranoia would drive him to destroy any threat to his reign. Her heart heavy with fear, Rhea Silvia looked down at her sons. They were so small, so helpless, and yet they carried the weight of a future that was far beyond her control. She knew that she could not protect them, not alone. The gods had willed that they would survive, but she did not know how. The time to act would come soon, but for now, all she could do was hold them close, her heart aching with a mother's love and the terrible knowledge of what was to come. Chapter 4. The King's Wrath. News of Rhea Silvia's sons reached Amulius faster than she had anticipated. It was only a matter of days before the whispers of the temple servants made their way to the king's ears. His spies, always lurking in the shadows, reported the birth of the twins to him with cold precision. Amulius's fury was immediate and violent. "How could this happen?" he roared, his voice echoing through the stone halls of the palace. "She was a Vestal virgin! How could she bear children?" His advisors, standing nervously at the foot of his throne, exchanged uneasy glances. They had no answers for the king, only their fear of his wrath. Amulius had ruled through terror and force for years, and no one dared to challenge him. "It is said, my lord," one of the advisors ventured cautiously, "that the children are the sons of Mars, the god of war. It is a divine intervention." At the mention of Mars, Amulius's face twisted with rage. Divine intervention or not, he would not allow these children to live. They were a threat to his reign, a reminder of the bloodline he had tried so hard to extinguish. He had killed their uncles, and now he would see these infants meet the same fate. With a wave of his hand, Amulius gave the order that would seal the fate of his grandnephews. "Take them!" he commanded, his voice cold and final. "Throw them into the river Tiber. Let the gods decide their fate." The soldiers, ever loyal to their king, did not hesitate. They made their way to the Temple of Vesta under the cover of darkness, their armor clinking softly as they moved through the streets. The city was silent, the people unaware of the tragedy that was about to unfold. When they reached the temple, the soldiers found Rhea Silvia holding her sons, her eyes red with tears, her body weak from childbirth. She knew why they had come. Her heart pounded in her chest as she clutched her sons tighter, her voice breaking as she begged them to spare her children. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible through her sobs. "They are innocent. They have done nothing wrong." But the soldiers, bound by their duty to the king, were unmoved by her pleas. Without a word, they pried the infants from her arms, their small bodies wrapped in rough cloth as they were taken away. As the soldiers carried her sons into the night, Rhea Silvia's sobs echoed through the temple, a mother's cry of despair that would forever haunt the halls of Alba Longa. Chapter 5. The River's Mercy. The soldiers made their way to the banks of the river Tiber, their faces expressionless as they prepared to carry out the king's orders. The river, swollen from the spring rains, rushed by with a fierce intensity, its dark waters churning and swirling like the chaos that had gripped the royal family of Alba Longa. Without ceremony, the soldiers placed the infants into a crude wicker basket, its sides barely held together by thin strands of reed. The basket, though fragile, seemed to float on the surface of the water as they pushed it into the current. For a moment the soldiers watched as the basket was swept downstream, the cries of the infants growing fainter with each passing second. They had done their duty, and now the river would decide the fate of the sons of Mars. But the gods had not abandoned Romulus and Remus. The river Tiber, though fierce and unforgiving, seemed to cradle the basket in its depths, carrying it gently through the currents as though guided by an unseen hand. The water, which had moments before been wild and tumultuous, now calmed, its surface rippling softly as the basket drifted toward the banks of the Palatine Hill. There, at the mouth of a dark cave hidden among the trees and rocks, the basket came to rest. The cave, known as the Lupa, was shrouded in shadow, its entrance obscured by thick undergrowth. It was a place where few dared to venture, for it was said to be the dwelling of wild beasts, creatures that stalked the night in search of prey. And within the darkness of that cave, a she-wolf stirred. Chapter 6. The Wolf's Embrace. The she-wolf, known as Lupa, had lived in the hills of Latium for many years. Her coat, once a rich dark gray, was now flecked with silver, the signs of age beginning to show. But even in her later years, she was still a formidable creature, strong, fierce, and intelligent. Her amber eyes gleamed with the sharpness of a predator, and her senses were as keen as ever. Lupa had once been a mother herself, though those days felt like a distant memory now. Her cubs, born in the early spring, had died shortly after birth, victims of the harsh realities of life in the wild. The loss had left her hollow, her heart aching with a grief that only a mother could understand. Since then she had wandered the hills alone, her sharp instincts dulled by the emptiness inside her. But on this night, as the moon hung low in the sky and the stars twinkled faintly above, Lupa's keen ears caught a sound, soft, faint, and unfamiliar. It was not the cry of prey, nor the howl of a rival wolf. It was something else, something fragile and helpless. Curiosity stirred within her, and with a grace born of years spent in the wild, Lupa rose from her den and padded silently toward the source of the sound. As she approached the riverbank, her sharp eyes caught sight of the basket, half submerged in the reeds. The cries grew louder, more insistent, and soon Lupa found herself standing over the strange object, her nose twitching as she sniffed the air. The scent of human filled her senses, but it was not the scent of adults. These were the cries of infants, two tiny, helpless creatures who had been abandoned to the whims of the wild. For a moment, Lupa hesitated. The human world was not her world, and she had no reason to involve herself in their affairs. But as she gazed down at the tiny forms inside the basket, something stirred within her. It was an ancient instinct buried deep within her, the instinct to protect and nurture. Though she had lost her own cubs, the sight of these helpless infants awakened something in her that she had thought long gone. Without hesitation, Lupa grasped the edge of the basket with her powerful jaws and pulled it free from the reeds. The basket, though heavy, was no burden for the she-wolf, who carried it carefully back to her den. There, in the warmth and safety of her cave, she laid the basket down and began to inspect its contents. The infants, now silent, blinked up at her with wide, curious eyes. Their small hands reached out instinctively, grasping at the air as if searching for comfort. Lupa's heart softened as she watched them, her maternal instincts taking over. She had lost her own cubs, but now, it seemed, the gods had given her a second chance. Over the next days and weeks, Lupa cared for the twins as though they were her own. She nursed them with the same tender care she had once given her cubs, providing them with warmth and sustenance. Her body, though that of a wild beast, became their sanctuary, her fur a soft protective barrier against the dangers of the world outside. The twins thrived under her care, their bond with the she-wolf growing stronger with each passing day. They learned to trust her, to depend on her, and in return she watched over them with a fierce loyalty. Her sharp eyes scanned the horizon for any sign of danger, and her powerful body stood ready to defend them from any threat. But the time would come when they could no longer remain hidden in the shadows of the wild. For although Lupa had given them the gift of life, the world beyond her cave held a destiny that neither she nor they could ignore. The prophecy of their birth still hung in the air, and soon the names of Romulus and Remus would echo through the ages. And so, dear listener, know that the story of Rome, like the stars above, shines ever brightly. Its roots are entwined with the legends of gods and men, the bond of brothers, and the strength of a wolf's heart. Yet the tale of Rome is far from over. New chapters and legends are still to unfold. But if you're ready for a peaceful slumber, I wish you a good night. The Wolf's Protection. Chapter 1. A Cry in the Wilderness. The night was still and quiet as the dark shadows of the hills loomed over the winding Tiber River. The moon, full and bright, cast its silvery light across the land, turning the river into a shimmering ribbon of liquid silver. The wilderness surrounding the river was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind whispered through the trees. It was a night like many others in the untamed lands of Latium, wild, serene, and filled with the mysteries of the natural world. But on this night, something unusual stirred in the wilderness. At the edge of the Palatine Hill, near the banks of the river, the soft cries of two infants echoed through the stillness. Their voices, weak and helpless, carried on the wind. reaching the ears of those who were still awake in the depths of the night. The cries were faint, barely more than a whimper, but they held within them a desperation that could not be ignored. For these were no ordinary cries. These were the cries of Romulus and Remus, the twin sons of Rhea Silvia, abandoned to the whims of the wild by the cruel orders of their great uncle, Amulius. The basket that held the twins floated gently on the surface of the river, carried by the current toward the banks. The soldiers who had placed the infants in the basket had believed that the river would claim their lives, that the waters would wash away any trace of their existence. But the gods had other plans for these sons of Mars. The river, far from being their doom, had cradled them in its embrace, guiding them toward safety, toward their destiny. As the basket drifted toward the shore, it became caught in the reeds that lined the riverbank. The soft cries of the twins continued, filling the night with a sense of urgency. But there was no one nearby to hear them. No one, that is, except for the wild creatures that called the wilderness their home. Among them was a she-wolf. Chapter 2. Lupa's Lament. High above the riverbank, nestled in a rocky cave on the side of the Palatine Hill, the she-wolf known as Lupa stirred in her sleep. Her body, once strong and lean, was now marked by the passage of time. Her once sleek coat was flecked with silver, and her eyes, though still sharp, had lost some of the fire of her youth. She had lived many years in the wilderness, surviving the harsh winters and the dangerous predators that roamed the land. But Lupa had not always been alone. In the spring, she had given birth to a litter of cubs, her first in many seasons. The joy of motherhood had filled her heart, and for a time she had believed that her days of wandering the wilderness alone were over. Her cubs had been strong, their cries loud and healthy, and she had nursed them with a fierce love that only a mother could know. But the wilderness was a cruel and unforgiving place. As the months passed, the cubs had grown weaker, their cries softer, until one by one they had faded away. Disease, starvation, and the ever-present threat of predators had claimed them, leaving Lupa alone once more. The loss had left her hollow, her heart aching with a grief that seemed too vast to bear. She had returned to her cave, retreating into the shadows, and had not ventured far since. Now, as she lay in the darkness of her den, the distant cries of the twins reached her ears. At first, she did not stir. The sounds of the wilderness were familiar to her, and the cries of helpless creatures were nothing new. But these cries were different. There was something in them that called to her, something that stirred the deep maternal instincts that had lain dormant since the loss of her cubs. Slowly, Lupa rose to her feet. Her ears pricked forward, and her sharp amber eyes scanned the darkness outside the cave. The cries came again, softer this time, but still filled with that unmistakable note of desperation. Without hesitation, Lupa stepped out of her den, her powerful legs carrying her down the hillside toward the riverbank. As she neared the source of the cries, her keen nose picked up the scent of something unfamiliar. It was not the scent of prey or predator, but something else, something human. She had encountered humans before, though she usually kept her distance. But this time, there was no fear in her heart, only a strange sense of urgency that drove her forward. When she reached the riverbank, her eyes fell upon the basket, half submerged in the reeds. The cries had grown weaker, and for a moment Lupa hesitated. But then, with a careful, deliberate movement, she approached the basket and peered inside. What she saw there made her heart lurch. 2 tiny, helpless infants lay inside, their faces pale and their eyes closed. Their tiny hands grasped at the air as if searching for something, someone to hold on to. They were so small, so fragile, and yet there was a strength in them that Lupa recognized, a strength that spoke of a destiny far greater than their current plight. Without a moment's hesitation, Lupa reached down and gently grasped the edge of the basket with her powerful jaws. She pulled it free from the reeds and carried it carefully back to her den, her heart filled with a sense of purpose that she had not felt since the loss of her cubs. Chapter 3. The Den of the Wolf. The cave where Lupa had made her home was dark and cool, sheltered from the harsh elements of the wilderness. It was a place of safety, a place where she had once nursed her cubs, and now it would become a sanctuary for the 2 human infants she had found by the riverbank. As she carried the basket into the cave, the cries of the twins began to grow softer, as if they sensed that they were no longer in danger. Lupa placed the basket gently on the ground and used her nose to nudge it open. The 2 infants, now quiet, blinked up at her with wide, curious eyes. Their small bodies trembled with the cold, and their tiny hands reached out as if seeking warmth. Lupa, guided by an instinct she did not fully understand, lay down beside the basket. Her body, warm and strong, became a source of comfort for the twins. She curled around them, her thick fur providing a protective barrier against the chill of the night. As she lay there, her heart beat in time with the soft breaths of the infants, and for the first time in many seasons, she felt a sense of peace. The twins, sensing the warmth and safety of their new protector, nestled against her, their cries fading into soft murmurs of contentment. Lupa, in turn, watched over them with the same fierce love she had once shown to her own cubs. She licked their faces gently, her rough tongue a soothing balm against their soft skin, and they responded with soft coos and gurgles. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, peaceful routine. Lupa would venture out into the wilderness to hunt, returning with food for the twins. Though they were not of her kind, she treated them as though they were her own, nursing them with the same care and devotion she had once given to her cubs. Under her watchful gaze, the twins grew stronger, their tiny bodies filling out as they thrived in the safety of the den. But Lupa knew that the wilderness was not a place where they could remain forever. The twins, though safe for now, would one day need more than what she could provide. They would need to return to the world of men, where their destiny awaited them. For though she did not fully understand it, Lupa sensed that these 2 infants were special, that they were destined for something far greater than the life of a wolf. Chapter 4. A Shepherd's Discovery. As the weeks passed, the twins grew stronger, their cries giving way to laughter and coos. Lupa, ever watchful, continued to care for them, but she knew that her time as their protector was coming to an end. The wilderness, while a safe haven for now, was no place for human children to grow. They would need the care and guidance of their own kind, and Lupa, though reluctant to part with them, understood this. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, casting a warm golden light over the land, Lupa sensed a change in the air. The sounds of the wilderness, the rustle of leaves, the calls of birds seemed to grow distant, and a new sound reached her ears. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, steady, and unmistakably human. Lupa rose from her place beside the twins, her ears pricked forward and her body tense. She had encountered humans before, but always from a distance. She knew that they were dangerous, unpredictable creatures, and her first instinct was to protect the twins. But as the footsteps drew closer, she caught a new scent on the wind, one that was not filled with malice or danger, but with curiosity and concern. From the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged. It was a man, dressed in the simple garments of a shepherd, his weathered face marked by years of toil in the sun. His name was Faustulus, and he was no stranger to the wilderness that surrounded Rome. For years he had tended his flocks in the hills, keeping watch over the sheep and cattle that roamed the land. He had seen many things in his time: wild animals, storms, even the occasional bandit. But nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to witness. As Faustulus stepped into the clearing, his eyes fell upon the sight of Lupa standing protectively over the two infants. For a moment he stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. A wolf caring for human children? It was impossible. And yet there they were, two small, healthy infants nestled safely against the body of the she-wolf. The sight filled him with awe and wonder. He had heard stories of wolves raising human children, but he had never believed them to be true. And yet here before him was living proof of those ancient tales. The gods, he thought, must have had a hand in this. Slowly, carefully, Faustulus approached. His movements were cautious, respectful, for he knew that a wild animal could be dangerous if threatened. But Lupa, sensing that the man meant no harm, did not growl or bare her teeth. Instead, she watched him with calm, steady eyes, as if understanding that the time had come for her to pass the children into the care of their own kind. When Faustulus reached the infants, he knelt beside them, his weathered hands gently cradling their small bodies. They looked up at him with wide, curious eyes, their tiny hands grasping at his fingers. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he realized just how special these children were. "These are no ordinary children," he murmured to himself. "The gods have a plan for them." Chapter 5. A New Beginning. With Lupa's silent blessing, Faustulus took the twins into his care. He carefully wrapped them in the folds of his cloak, cradling them against his chest as he rose to his feet. The warmth of their small bodies filled him with a sense of responsibility, a knowledge that he had been entrusted with something far greater than himself. As he turned to leave, he cast one last glance at Lupa, who remained standing at the edge of the clearing. Her amber eyes met his, and for a brief moment there was an understanding between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that their roles in the lives of these children, though different, were equally important. With a nod of gratitude, Faustulus made his way back toward the hills, the twins nestled safely in his arms. As he walked, the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its golden light over the land and filling the air with the promise of a new day. The twins, Romulus and Remus, had been born of gods and men, saved by the river and protected by the she-wolf. Now they would grow under the care of Faustulus and his wife, Larentia, who would raise them as their own. But their journey was far from over. The destiny that had been foretold at their birth was still waiting to unfold, and the city that would one day bear their names was yet to be built. As Faustulus disappeared into the distance, Lupa watched him go, her heart filled with a strange mix of sadness and pride. The twins had been her cubs for a time, but now they were on the path to their true destiny. With a final glance at the empty clearing, Lupa turned and padded back toward her cave. The wilderness would always be her home, but in her heart, she knew that a part of her would always be with the two children she had protected. And so, dear listener, the story of Lupa, the noble she-wolf, draws to a close. Her legacy, like the eternal city of Rome, is woven with threads of strength, loyalty, and fate. As you drift into sleep, let your dreams carry you to ancient lands and untamed wilderness, where the ties of love and protection endure beyond the ages, unbroken by time or nature. The Battle for Kingship, Romulus versus Remus. Chapter 1. The Seeds of Conflict. The sun was just beginning to rise over the hills of Latium, casting a golden glow across the landscape. The river Tiber shimmered like a ribbon of light winding through the valley, its gentle current reflecting the clear blue sky above. On the hills surrounding the river, the first signs of life stirred as farmers and shepherds went about their morning routines. It was a peaceful, serene scene. But beneath the surface, tensions were brewing that would soon erupt into a conflict that would change the course of history. At the heart of this brewing storm were two brothers, Romulus and Remus. Raised together in the wild by the she-wolf Lupa, and later by the shepherd Faustulus and his wife, the twins had always shared an unbreakable bond. They had survived the cruelty of their great-uncle Amulius, had risen from the brink of death as infants, and had grown into strong, capable young men. Together, they had reclaimed their rightful place as heirs to the throne of Alba Longa, restoring their grandfather Numitor to power and bringing justice to their family. But now, with their greatest battle behind them, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. The prophecy of their birth had foretold that the brothers would build a great city, a city that would rise to become the most powerful in the world. This city, however, had yet to be built, and it was here, in the fertile land surrounding the Palatine Hill, that the seeds of conflict began to take root. The brothers had always been equals, bound by love and a shared destiny. But as they began to discuss the founding of their city, it became clear that their visions for its future were not aligned. Both were driven by ambition, a desire to leave their mark on the world. But their differing perspectives on how to achieve this goal began to create a rift between them. The first signs of tension appeared when the brothers chose the site for their city. Romulus had always been drawn to the Palatine Hill. Its elevated position offered a strategic advantage, with a clear view of the surrounding land and the river that would provide the lifeblood of their future city. He envisioned a city built on strength, a fortress that would stand for eternity, protected by the natural barriers of the land. Remus, however, favored the Aventine Hill. Its location was closer to the river, and he believed it offered more fertile ground for the growth of their city. He saw the future city as a place of prosperity and abundance, a place where people could live in harmony with the land, supported by the resources of the river and the fertile fields surrounding it. At first, the disagreement seemed minor, a difference of opinion that could be resolved through discussion. But as the days passed, and the brothers continued to debate the future of their city, the tension between them grew. Their arguments became more heated, and the once unbreakable bond between them began to fray. "The Palatine is the ideal location for our city, Remus," Romulus insisted one evening as they stood on the banks of the Tiber, gazing up at the hills. "It's high ground, easily defensible. From there we can see anyone who approaches, and the river will still provide for our people." Remus, his jaw set in defiance, shook his head. "The Aventine is closer to the river, Romulus. The land is more fertile, and our people will thrive there. Why build a fortress when we can build a city of prosperity?" "Because a fortress will stand the test of time," Romulus replied, his voice firm. "This isn't just about survival, Remus. It's about building something that will last forever. The Palatine will ensure that our city remains strong, no matter what challenges come our way." Remus crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing as he looked at his brother. "And what good is a fortress if the people inside it are starving? A city isn't just walls and soldiers, Romulus. It's about the land, the resources, the people. The Aventine will give us all of that." Their argument echoed across the valley, the sounds of their raised voices carrying on the wind. For the first time in their lives, the brothers found themselves on opposite sides of a conflict, each convinced that their vision was the right one. And as the days passed, the rift between them only grew wider. Chapter 2. The Omen from the Gods. With no resolution in sight, the brothers turned to the gods for guidance. In ancient Rome, the will of the gods was sought through augury, the practice of interpreting the flight of birds to determine divine favor. Both Romulus and Remus believed that the gods would offer them a sign, a clear indication of whose vision should guide the founding of their city. Early one morning, before the first light of dawn had touched the sky, the brothers climbed to the tops of their respective hills. Romulus ascended to the summit of the Palatine Hill, while Remus made his way to the peak of the Aventine. From these vantage points they would watch the skies, seeking an omen from the gods that would settle their dispute once and for all. The air was crisp and cool, and the sky above was a deep indigo, the stars still visible in the early morning light. Romulus stood at the edge of the Palatine Hill, his eyes scanning the horizon as he waited for a sign. His heart was steady, his mind clear, and he felt a sense of calm confidence that the gods would favor his vision. On the Aventine, Remus watched the sky with equal intensity, his heart pounding in his chest as he waited for the moment that would determine the future of their city. He believed with every fiber of his being that the gods would show him favor. The Aventine Hill was fertile, rich with life, and he knew that this was where their city was meant to rise. For hours the brothers watched in silence, the only sound the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. And then, at last, the omen came. From the north, a flock of birds appeared, their wings beating rhythmically as they flew toward the hills. Romulus, his heart quickening, counted the birds as they flew overhead. 12, a sacred number, a clear sign of divine favor. His chest swelled with pride and certainty. The gods had spoken. The Palatine Hill was the chosen site for their city. On the Aventine, Remus watched as 6 birds flew overhead, their wings dark against the pale morning sky. His heart sank as he realized that his sign was not as grand as his brother's. The omen was clear. Romulus had been favored by the gods. But Remus, ever defiant, refused to accept the verdict. His pride, wounded by the gods' choice, burned hot within him. He had always been Romulus's equal, his brother in every sense, and now he could not bear the thought of being overshadowed by him. The bitterness of defeat gnawed at him, and in his heart, a dangerous seed of jealousy began to grow. Chapter 3. The Fall of Remus. Though the gods had spoken, Remus was not ready to relinquish his claim. He returned to his brother's camp on the Palatine Hill, where Romulus had already begun the process of laying out the foundation for their city. Workers were clearing the land, marking the boundaries where the city's walls would stand, and Romulus stood overseeing the work, his face set with determination. When Remus arrived, he stood at the edge of the clearing, watching as his brother directed the workers. His fists clenched at his sides, the sight of his brother's success only fueling his resentment. In Remus's eyes, it was as though Romulus was already building his empire, leaving him behind. For a moment, Remus considered turning away, leaving his brother to his city. But the thought of being forgotten, of fading into obscurity while Romulus went on to become the founder of a great empire, was unbearable. His pride demanded that he act, that he make his mark, even if it meant defying the will of the gods. With a surge of anger, Remus stepped forward, his feet carrying him toward the boundary that Romulus had marked for the city's walls. The workers stopped and stared as Remus approached, their hands falling still as they watched the confrontation unfold. "So you've already decided that this is your city, have you?" Remus called out, his voice sharp with sarcasm. "The gods may have given you their sign, but that doesn't mean you get to claim everything for yourself." Romulus, his expression unreadable, turned to face his brother. "The gods have spoken, Remus," he replied calmly. "This is where our city will be built. The omens were clear." Remus's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched in anger. "You mean your city? You've already decided that this is about you, haven't you? You've always wanted to be the one in charge, to stand above everyone else. Well, I won't let you." Before Romulus could respond, Remus did something that would seal his fate. In a final act of defiance, he stepped over the boundary that Romulus had marked for the city's walls. His foot landed on the other side, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. The workers who had been watching in silence gasped in shock. Romulus, his face pale with disbelief, stared at his brother. This was not just a simple act of rebellion. To cross the boundary was to challenge the very foundation of the city, to mock the gods' will and the sanctity of the land they had chosen. For a brief, fleeting moment, Romulus hesitated. His heart was torn between the love he had always felt for his brother and the weight of the destiny that lay before him. But in that moment of hesitation, something dark and unrelenting took hold of him. His vision for the city, the prophecy that had been foretold, the divine favor he had received, it all demanded action. With a cry of rage, Romulus drew his sword. The blade flashed in the sunlight as he swung it with deadly precision, striking Remus down in a single brutal blow. The force of the strike sent Remus to the ground, his body crumpling at the foot of the boundary he had dared to cross. For a moment there was silence. The workers stood frozen, their eyes wide with shock and horror. Romulus, his chest heaving, stared down at his brother's lifeless body, the full weight of what he had done crashing down upon him. The bond that had once united the brothers was shattered, broken by the sword that had ended Remus's life. Romulus, his face pale and his heart heavy with grief, knew that there was no turning back. His city Rome would rise from the ground, but it would be built on the blood of his brother. Chapter 4. The Rise of Rome. In the days that followed, the people of the region whispered of the tragic death of Remus and the founding of the city that would come to be known as Rome. Romulus, now the sole ruler of the fledgling city, buried his brother with full honors, knowing that their shared destiny had been irrevocably altered. He stood alone at the gravesite, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him like a heavy stone. The land where Remus had fallen became sacred ground, a place where the memory of the brothers' bond and their tragic end would live on. Romulus, though stricken with grief, pressed forward with the task of building the city that had been foretold. He poured all of his energy into the construction of Rome, determined to honor the prophecy and create a city that would stand for eternity. Under Romulus's leadership, Rome began to take shape. The walls rose high on the Palatine Hill, strong and formidable, a symbol of the city's future strength and power. The people who had once been divided by the brothers' conflict now came together under Romulus's rule, united by the promise of a new beginning. But even as the city grew, the memory of Remus lingered. Romulus could not escape the shadow of his brother's death, the blood that had been spilled in the name of destiny. He knew that Rome would be forever marked by the sacrifice that had been made, the price that had been paid to ensure its survival. And so, as the city of Rome rose from the ground, its foundations were laid not just in stone and mortar, but in the love and loss of two brothers whose bond had been torn apart by ambition and fate. Chapter 5. The Legacy of Romulus. Years passed, and Rome grew into a thriving city, its walls towering over the surrounding landscape, its people strong and resilient. Romulus, now a king in his own right, ruled with the strength and determination that had always defined him. His vision for the city had come to fruition, and Rome had become a beacon of power and influence in the region. But as the years wore on, Romulus could not escape the weight of his past. The memory of Remus, of the brother he had loved and lost, haunted him. He would often find himself standing at the edge of the city walls, gazing out at the hills where they had once roamed together as children, the memories of their shared past playing like a distant dream in his mind. In his heart, Romulus knew that Rome would endure, that the city they had dreamed of would rise to become one of the greatest empires the world had ever known. But he also knew that the city had been born from sacrifice, from the blood of his brother, the bond that had been broken in the pursuit of destiny. As he stood on the walls of Rome, the wind whipping through his hair, Romulus raised his eyes to the sky, where the birds still circled high above. He had followed the will of the gods, and in doing so, had built a city that would stand for eternity. But even the gods, he thought, could not heal the wound that had been left in his heart. And so, dear listener, if sleep is near, close your eyes and drift away, cradling the story of two brothers whose love and rivalry shaped the destiny of an empire. Their once unbreakable bond was fractured by ambition, yet from their sacrifice, the great city of Rome was born. But if sleep has not yet found you, let us continue onward, for there are still stories left to unfold. The Founding of Rome. Chapter 1. A City Born from Blood. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm golden light across the fertile hills of Latium. The land was quiet, save for the soft rustling of the wind through the olive groves and the distant murmur of the Tiber as it wound its way through the valley. But within the heart of this serene landscape, something monumental was taking shape, something that would change the course of history forever. The death of Remus hung heavy over the land. The once unbreakable bond between the twin brothers had been severed, not by time or distance, but by the weight of ambition and pride. Romulus, now alone, stood over the grave of his brother, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what he had done. Remus had been his equal, his other half, and now he was gone, taken by the same ambition that had driven them both to greatness. But in the wake of tragedy, a new chapter was beginning. The city that the brothers had once dreamed of, the city that had been foretold by the gods, would now rise from the ashes of their broken bond. Romulus, though racked with grief, knew that he could not abandon the vision that had been set before him. The city of Rome would be built not just in stone and mortar, but in the memory of his brother. As the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the land, Romulus stood at the edge of the Palatine Hill, gazing out over the valley below. The land stretched out before him, fertile and full of promise, and in his mind's eye he could already see the city that would rise from the ground. The Palatine, with its high vantage point and natural defenses, was the perfect site for the city's foundation. From here, Rome would grow, expanding outward like the branches of a mighty tree, its roots sinking deep into the earth. But before the city could take shape, there was work to be done. The land had to be cleared, the boundaries marked, and the first stone laid. Romulus knew that this was not just a physical task, it was a sacred one. The founding of Rome would be an act of creation, one that would be guided by the gods themselves. With a heavy heart and a mind filled with determination, Romulus turned away from the grave of his brother and set his sights on the future. The city of Rome would rise, and its legacy would endure for centuries to come. Chapter 2. The Ritual of Foundation. The founding of a city was not a simple matter of laying stones and building walls. In ancient times, the creation of a city was a deeply spiritual act, one that required the blessing of the gods and the observance of sacred rituals. Romulus, as the son of Mars, knew that the success of Rome depended not just on the strength of its people, but on the favor of the divine. The ritual of foundation, known as the Ritual of Pomerium, was the first step in marking the sacred boundaries of the city. The Pomerium was more than just a physical boundary. It was a spiritual one, a line that separated the sacred space of the city from the wilderness beyond. Within the Pomerium, the city would be protected by the gods, its people safe from the chaos of the outside world. On the morning of the ritual, the sky was clear, the air crisp and cool. The people of the surrounding lands had gathered on the Palatine Hill, their eyes filled with anticipation as they watched Romulus prepare for the sacred ceremony. The tension in the air was palpable, for they knew that this was no ordinary day. This was the day that the city of Rome would be born. Romulus, dressed in the simple white robes of a priest, stood at the center of the gathering, holding a bronze plow in his hands. The plow, drawn by a pair of white oxen, one male and one female, was a symbol of fertility and abundance. It was said that the gods themselves had gifted the plow to the founders of great cities, and now Romulus would use it to mark the sacred boundaries of Rome. With a solemn expression, Romulus stepped forward, his hands steady as he guided the oxen to the edge of the hill. The crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on him as he began to plow a deep furrow in the earth, tracing the outline of the city's future walls. As the plow moved through the soil, the earth parted beneath it, creating a physical boundary that marked the sacred space of the city. The ritual was slow, deliberate. Romulus walked the entire perimeter of the Palatine Hill, his mind focused on the task at hand. Each step he took was a step toward the future, a future that would be shaped by the city that was now taking form. As he plowed, he whispered prayers to the gods, asking for their blessing and protection over the city that would soon rise from the earth. When the furrow was complete, Romulus returned to the center of the hill, where an altar had been set up for the final part of the ritual. At the altar, a fire burned brightly, its flames licking the air as an offering to the gods. With a steady hand, Romulus took a handful of grain and cast it into the flames, the crackling sound filling the air as the grain was consumed by the fire. "To the gods, I dedicate this city," Romulus intoned, his voice strong and clear. "May it stand for all eternity, protected by your favor and blessed by your power. Let the name of Rome be known throughout the ages, and may its people prosper under your watchful gaze." The crowd, watching in awe, knew that they were witnessing the birth of something truly extraordinary. The city of Rome, though still only a vision in the mind of Romulus, was now bound to the divine. Its future was secure, its legacy already beginning to take shape. Chapter 3. The First Walls of Rome. With the sacred boundary marked and the blessing of the gods secured, the physical work of building Rome could now begin. The first task was to construct the walls that would enclose the city, providing protection from the dangers of the wilderness beyond. The walls, though modest in their initial form, would one day grow to encompass a mighty empire. But for now, they were simply the first stones laid in what would become the greatest city the world had ever known. Romulus, though young, possessed the leadership and vision of a seasoned ruler. He knew that the success of the city depended not just on its walls, but on the people who would build them. And so he gathered the people of the surrounding lands, the farmers, the shepherds, the craftsmen, and offered them a place in his new city. Rome would be a city of opportunity, a place where anyone, regardless of their past, could find a home and a purpose. The people, inspired by Romulus's vision and the promise of a new beginning, came in droves to help build the city. With their hands and their hearts, they worked tirelessly, cutting stone from the quarries and shaping it into the blocks that would form the city's walls. The sound of hammers striking stone echoed across the valley, a steady rhythm that matched the beating of their hearts. The first wall, known as the Servian Wall, was built along the perimeter of the Palatine Hill, following the furrow that Romulus had plowed during the ritual of foundation. Though small by the standards of later fortifications, it was strong and well constructed, a testament to the skill and dedication of the people who built it. As the walls rose higher, so too did the sense of pride and purpose among the people. This was their city, a place where they could build a future for themselves and their families. The name of Rome spread quickly through the region, drawing more people to its gates, eager to be a part of something greater than themselves. By the time the walls were complete, Rome had already begun to take on the shape of a true city. The streets were laid out in a grid, the first houses and public buildings rising from the ground. The Forum, the heart of the city's political and social life, was marked out, its future importance already apparent. The people of Rome, united by their shared labor and vision, looked to Romulus as their leader and protector. But even as the city grew, there was one question that remained unanswered. Who would rule over this new city? Romulus had always been a leader, but the city needed more than just a founder. It needed a king. Chapter 4. The Choice of a King. As the city of Rome began to take shape, the question of leadership became increasingly important. Romulus, though respected and admired by the people, knew that the role of king was not one to be taken lightly. The city needed a ruler who could guide it through the challenges that lay ahead, someone who could unite its people and lead them to greatness. The people of Rome, too, recognized the need for a king. But who would they choose? Romulus, as the founder of the city and the son of Mars, seemed the natural choice. But there were others who believed that the city should be ruled by a council of elders, a group of wise men who could make decisions on behalf of the people. The debate over the city's leadership quickly became the central issue facing the people of Rome. In the forum, where the people gathered to discuss the future of their city, the voices of the citizens rang out as they debated the merits of a monarchy versus a republic. Some argued that a strong, singular ruler was necessary to maintain order and protect the city, while others believed that the people should have a say in their own governance. For Romulus, the decision was clear. He had founded the city, and it was his vision that had brought it to life. He believed that the gods had chosen him to lead Rome, and he was ready to accept the responsibility that came with that role. But he knew that he could not simply declare himself king. The people had to choose him, and for that to happen, he needed to prove his worth. In a grand display of leadership and strength, Romulus called for a public assembly in the forum. The entire city gathered to hear him speak, their eyes filled with anticipation as they waited to hear what their founder had to say. Standing before the crowd, Romulus spoke with the confidence and authority of a true king. He reminded the people of the sacrifices that had been made to build the city, of the vision that had guided them from the beginning. He spoke of the gods' favor, of the divine will that had brought them to this point. And he promised that under his leadership, Rome would rise to become the greatest city the world had ever known. The people, moved by his words and inspired by his vision, erupted into applause. There was no longer any doubt in their minds. Romulus was their king. With the decision made, Romulus was crowned as the first king of Rome in a grand ceremony held in the forum. The people cheered as he took his place on the throne, their hearts filled with pride and hope for the future. The city of Rome now had a king, and under his leadership, it would grow to become a mighty empire. Chapter 5. The Birth of a Nation. With Romulus as its king, the city of Rome entered a new phase of its development. No longer just a collection of walls and houses, Rome was now a true city, a place where people from all walks of life could come together to build a future. Under Romulus's leadership, the city began to grow rapidly, attracting settlers from the surrounding lands and even from distant regions. One of Romulus's first acts as king was to establish a set of laws that would govern the city. These laws, though simple at first, laid the foundation for the complex legal system that would one day govern the entire Roman Empire. Romulus believed that order and justice were essential to the success of the city, and he worked tirelessly to ensure that the people of Rome were treated fairly and with respect. But even as Rome grew, there were challenges that had to be faced. The city's rapid expansion brought with it the need for more resources, more land, and more people. Romulus, ever the visionary, knew that Rome could not survive in isolation. The city needed to expand its influence, to form alliances with the neighboring tribes, and to secure its place as a dominant power in the region. To achieve this, Romulus began a series of diplomatic efforts, forging alliances with the neighboring tribes of the Sabines, the Etruscans, and others. These alliances, though sometimes tense, helped to secure Rome's position as a growing power in the region. Through marriage, trade, and diplomacy, Rome began to establish itself as a center of influence, a city that was respected and feared by its neighbors. But not all of Rome's neighbors were eager to ally with the new city. The Sabines, a powerful tribe to the north, viewed Rome with suspicion, believing that the city's rapid growth posed a threat to their own power. Tensions between the two groups quickly escalated, leading to a series of skirmishes and raids along the border. In response, Romulus led his army into battle, determined to defend his city and secure its future. The battles were fierce, but under Romulus's leadership, the Roman forces were victorious. The Sabines, impressed by Rome's strength and determination, eventually agreed to a truce, and the two groups formed an uneasy alliance. The success of the military campaigns and the growing influence of Rome only served to strengthen Romulus's position as king. The people, once divided over the question of leadership, now looked to him as a hero and a leader who could guide them through the challenges that lay ahead. Chapter 6: The Legacy of Romulus. As the years passed, Rome continued to grow and prosper under the leadership of Romulus. The city's population expanded, its economy flourished, and its influence spread throughout the region. Romulus, now a seasoned ruler, continued to guide the city with the same vision and determination that had driven him from the beginning. But even as Rome grew, the memory of Remus lingered in the heart of Romulus. The death of his brother had been the catalyst for the founding of the city, but it had also left a scar on Romulus's soul. Though he had achieved greatness, he could never forget the cost of that greatness, the life of his brother, the bond that had been broken in pursuit of power. In his later years, Romulus often retreated to the hills surrounding Rome, where he would sit in silence, gazing out over the city that he had built. The walls of Rome rose high above the valley, a testament to the strength and vision of its people. But for Romulus, they were also a reminder of the sacrifices that had been made to bring the city to life. As he sat on the hills, his mind would often drift back to the days of his youth, to the time when he and Remus had dreamed of building a city together. In those quiet moments, Romulus wondered what the future might have been like if things had turned out differently. But he knew that the past could not be changed, and that the city of Rome, his city, was destined for greatness. In the end, Romulus accepted his fate, knowing that he had fulfilled the prophecy that had been foretold so many years ago. The city of Rome would stand for all eternity, a beacon of power and strength, its name known throughout the ages. And though Romulus would one day be taken up to the heavens, his legacy would live on in the city that he had founded. The walls of Rome would grow taller, its influence would spread farther, and the name of Romulus would be remembered as the father of the greatest empire the world had ever known. If you're ready to drift into sleep, carry with you the tale of Romulus, the founder of Rome, whose steadfast vision and determination shaped the course of an empire. From blood and sacrifice, Rome arose as a symbol of strength and unity, enduring through the ages. But if sleep has yet to claim you, let us journey onward together through two more stories. Romulus's Ascension to the Heavens. Chapter 1: The Weight of a King's Crown. The years following the founding of Rome had been marked by great successes and challenges alike. Under Romulus's leadership, the city had grown from a small settlement on the Palatine Hill into a thriving community, a beacon of strength and unity in a land where chaos and war had once reigned. The city walls had been built high and strong, The streets were filled with the sounds of commerce and life, and the name of Rome had begun to spread beyond its borders. But with success came the heavy burden of leadership, a weight that Romulus carried alone. He had risen to power on the strength of his vision and his divine lineage as the son of Mars, the god of war. His people revered him, looking to him not just as their king, but as a figure touched by the gods, a mortal imbued with divine favor. Yet, for all the power and reverence that came with his crown, Romulus could not escape the sense of isolation that had grown within him. He was king, yes, but at what cost? The death of his brother Remus. The blood that had been spilled in the name of the city's future still weighed heavily on his heart. Though the people of Rome had long since forgotten the conflict that had taken Remus's life, Romulus could never forget. He often found himself wandering alone through the streets of his city at night, his mind filled with memories of the past. The people of Rome had grown accustomed to these solitary walks. They would see their king, cloaked in his simple garments, walking the streets with a quiet intensity. To them, he was more than just a ruler. He was a living embodiment of the city's strength and destiny. But to Romulus, these walks were moments of reflection, a time to escape the heavy mantle of leadership and remember the boy he had once been, the brother he had lost, and the city they had dreamed of together. Yet, despite the loneliness that sometimes crept into his heart, Romulus remained a steadfast leader. He governed with a firm hand, ensuring that the laws of the city were upheld and that justice was meted out fairly. Under his rule, Rome had become not just a city, but a symbol of power and stability in a land torn by tribal conflicts. The neighboring tribes, the Sabines, the Etruscans, and others, had come to respect and fear the growing might of Rome, and alliances had been forged that strengthened the city's influence. But even as Rome flourished, whispers began to spread among the people. There was something different about their king, they said. He had always been strong, but now there was an air of divinity about him, a sense that he was no longer bound by the mortal world. Some claimed to have seen him in moments of anger, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Others spoke of strange occurrences in the palace, objects moving of their own accord, shadows that seemed to flicker and dance in ways that defied explanation. The people of Rome, who had always revered Romulus as a leader touched by the gods, began to wonder if their king was becoming something more, something beyond mortal comprehension. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. The signs of Romulus's transformation were subtle at first, but as time passed, they became impossible to ignore. His connection to the divine, which had always been a part of his identity as the son of Mars, now seemed to grow stronger, more pronounced. There were moments when, in the heat of battle, or in the midst of a difficult decision, Romulus would appear to be filled with a power that was not entirely his own. His eyes would flash with a strange light. His voice would take on a deeper, more resonant tone, and those around him would feel the presence of something greater, a force beyond the mortal realm. The people of Rome, ever mindful of the gods, began to speak of these occurrences with awe and reverence. They believed that Romulus was no longer just a king, but a vessel for the divine will of the gods. He was their protector, their guide, and now, it seemed, he was becoming something even more. The whispers spread quickly from the highest echelons of society to the common people in the streets. Romulus was ascending. But for Romulus, the changes he felt were both exhilarating and terrifying. He could feel the power of his father, Mars, coursing through his veins, a connection to the divine that grew stronger with each passing day. In moments of quiet reflection, he could hear the whispers of the gods, their voices calling to him from the heavens, urging him to embrace his destiny. Yet, at the same time, there was a part of Romulus that feared what this transformation might mean. Would he lose himself entirely? Would he become something more than mortal? Or would he cease to exist as the man he had once been? It was during this time that Romulus began to withdraw from the daily affairs of the city. He left much of the governance to his trusted advisors, spending more and more time in solitude. He would often climb to the top of the Palatine Hill, where he had once laid the foundation for Rome, and gaze out over the city that had become his life's work. The view from the hill was breathtaking. Rome's streets stretched out before him, the walls standing tall and proud, the river Tiber winding its way through the valley. But even as he looked out over the city he had built, Romulus could not shake the feeling that his time in Rome was coming to an end. The gods were calling him, and soon he would have to answer. It was during one such moment of contemplation that the first signs of the storm appeared. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, swirling in a way that was unnatural, as if driven by forces beyond the ordinary. The air grew thick with tension, and the wind began to howl through the streets of Rome, carrying with it the scent of rain and lightning. The people of Rome, sensing that something momentous was about to happen, looked to the skies with fear and awe. They had seen storms before, but this was different. There was an energy in the air, a charge that set their nerves on edge and made their hearts race. It was as if the heavens themselves were preparing for an event that would shake the very foundations of their world. And at the center of it all stood Romulus, his face turned toward the storm, his heart filled with a strange mix of anticipation and dread. Chapter 3. The Field of Mars. The storm that had been brewing on the horizon soon enveloped the entire city of Rome, casting the sky into a deep, ominous darkness. Lightning crackled through the clouds, illuminating the landscape in flashes of brilliant white, and the wind howled with a fury that rattled the walls of the city. The people of Rome huddled in their homes, watching the storm with a mixture of fear and reverence, for they knew that this was no ordinary storm. This was the work of the gods. In the midst of the tempest, Romulus called for a gathering in the Field of Mars, the large open space just outside the city walls, where the people would often assemble for festivals and military exercises. The field, named for his father, the god of war, was a place of great significance, and Romulus knew that whatever was about to happen, it would happen there. The people of Rome, though fearful of the storm, heeded their king's call. They gathered in the Field of Mars, their faces pale and their eyes wide as they watched the sky churn above them. The storm raged overhead, but not a drop of rain fell on the field. It was as if the gods were holding back the full force of their wrath, waiting for the moment when they would reveal their will. Romulus, standing at the center of the gathering, raised his arms to the sky. His face was illuminated by the flashes of lightning, and his eyes burned with a fierce intensity. He looked every bit the son of Mars, a man who had been touched by the gods, and who now stood on the threshold of something far greater than himself. "People of Rome," Romulus called out, his voice booming over the roar of the storm. "You have followed me since the founding of this great city. You have fought by my side, built by my side, and together we have made Rome strong. But now, the time has come for me to leave this mortal world. The gods are calling me to the heavens. and I must answer their call." The people, hearing their king's words, were filled with both sorrow and awe. They had always known that Romulus was more than just a man. He was the son of Mars, a leader chosen by the gods themselves. But now, the reality of his impending departure struck them with a profound sense of loss. Romulus, the founder of their city, their king, was about to leave them. As Romulus spoke, the storm above seemed to reach its peak. The clouds swirled faster, the lightning flashed brighter, and the wind howled with a deafening roar. The ground beneath the people's feet trembled, and the air was charged with a strange electric energy. And then, in a blinding flash of light, Romulus was gone. The people gasped in shock, their eyes searching the field for any sign of their king. But he had vanished. There was no body, no trace of him left behind, only the storm, which continued to rage above them. For a moment, there was only silence. The people stood frozen, their hearts pounding in their chests as they tried to comprehend what had just happened. And then, slowly, the storm began to dissipate. The clouds parted, the wind died down, and the sky cleared, revealing the soft golden light of the setting sun. The people of Rome, still reeling from the shock of what they had witnessed, began to murmur among themselves. Romulus was gone, taken by the gods. But though they mourned the loss of their king, they knew that his ascension was a sign of the gods' favor. Romulus, their leader, had been chosen to join the gods in the heavens. Chapter 4. The Rise of Quirinus. In the days following Romulus's disappearance, the people of Rome were left to grapple with the reality of their king's ascension. The story of his vanishing spread quickly through the city, and soon the people were telling tales of how Romulus had been taken up to the heavens by Mars himself. They spoke of the storm that had raged over the field of Mars, of the lightning that had illuminated the sky, and of the moment when their king had vanished in a flash of light. But even as they marveled at the divine nature of Romulus's departure, the people of Rome were left with a pressing question: who would lead them now? The city, though strong, was still in its early years, and the loss of its founder and king left a power vacuum that could easily lead to instability. The people looked to Romulus's advisors and generals for guidance, but none could fill the void left by their king. There was talk of electing a new leader, of forming a council to rule the city, but no decision could be made without first addressing the divine implications of Romulus's ascension. It was during this time of uncertainty that the people of Rome began to receive signs from the gods. One night, as the city slept, a bright star appeared in the sky above the Palatine Hill. It shone with a brilliance unlike any other, its light casting a soft glow over the city below. The people, seeing the star, believed it to be a sign from Romulus, a message from their king that he was watching over them from the heavens. The following day, a priest of Mars came forward with a vision. He claimed that Romulus had appeared to him in a dream, not as a man, but as a god. In the vision, Romulus had spoken of his new role in the divine realm, where he had been given the name Quirinus, the protector of Rome. As Quirinus, Romulus would continue to watch over the city he had founded, ensuring its prosperity and guiding its people from the heavens. The people of Rome, hearing this vision, were filled with a renewed sense of purpose. They no longer mourned the loss of their king, for they knew that he had not left them. He had simply taken on a new form, a form that would allow him to protect Rome for all eternity. The temple of Quirinus was built on the Quirinal Hill, and from that day forward, Romulus was worshipped as a god, his name invoked in prayers for the city's continued success. Chapter 5. The Eternal City. With Romulus now watching over them as the god Quirinus, the people of Rome felt a renewed sense of confidence in their city's future. They continued to build and expand, their efforts guided by the belief that their king, now a god, was with them in spirit. The walls of Rome grew taller, its population swelled, and its influence spread throughout the region. The city, once just a dream in the minds of two brothers, had become a reality, a thriving, powerful community that would one day rise to become the center of an empire. The legacy of Romulus lived on in every stone, every building, every law that governed the people. He had given them a city, and now, as Quirinus, he had given them his protection. But even as Rome flourished, the memory of Romulus's ascension to the heavens remained a central part of the city's identity. Each year, the people would gather in the field of Mars to commemorate the day their king had been taken by the gods. They would tell the story of the storm, of the lightning, and of the moment when Romulus had vanished, his body lifted to the heavens by the will of the gods. The festival, known as the Quirinalia, became one of the most important events in the Roman calendar. It was a time of celebration, of honoring the city's divine protector, and of remembering the man who had laid the foundation for all that Rome had become. And so the city of Rome continued to grow, its people united by a shared sense of purpose and destiny. They knew that no matter what challenges they faced, they would always have the protection of their king, their god, Romulus, now Quirinus, the eternal guardian of the city. And so, dear listener, as we close this chapter of our tale, and if you're ready to surrender to sleep, remember the legend of Romulus, the king who ascended to godhood. His path from mortal to divine is a story of destiny, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between a leader and his people. But if sleep hasn't claimed you yet, let us journey onward together.